Hey everyone, I'm super excited to geek out with you today on this live stream. Thank you all so much for joining on a Wednesday. It took me a moment there for a second to remember which day it was. So hope you're all not unclear where you are in the week. So today's live stream is about open source feature flags with Flagsmith. I have two awesome guests with me today. And most of the time we hard code flags and conditions in our projects. We all do it, and we all have to redeploy every time we want to make a change. But if we use the open source project Flagsmith, then we don't need to. And that's what we're going to show you today in 3 awesome examples. And there's going to be a bonus example at the end, so do stick around. For those of you who are familiar with my content over the last 1 or 2 years, you've seen me talking about the EddieHub open source project BioDrop. I've done many live streams and videos and Twitter spaces on that. It's the open source version of Linktree focused for techies. And BioDrop could really benefit from Flagsmith in so many ways. We could do A/B testing. We could also control the way premium feature works. And we could decouple releases from the deployment. And my favorite one that we're going to show today, we could manage the notification messages on the landing page. Flagsmith is fully open source. This is me, so no surprise there. And it can be run from the cloud for free and also from Docker. Joining me today, we're going to talking about joining me today talking about all things feature flags, a bit of a tongue twister. We're going to go through some real world examples, and you're going to code along with us is Kyle and Matt. And Kyle is one of the founders of Flagsmith. And Kyle, I want to thank you for submitting a bug fix to the BioDrop project already. That was awesome. Thank you so much for bumping that node version. And I know from your DevTO profile that you like to drink coffee and make things, but I'm sure our audience would love to know, why Flagsmith got started. And could you tell us more about your journey in building this amazing open source project?
Yeah, absolutely. So Flagsmith came around quite naturally. So for the past 10 years, I've been working with a company called Solid State Group. They're a development agency in London. And we've been making a bunch of apps for ranging between startups, SMEs, and enterprise applications. And some of the larger projects in particular, we were in a position where we only release like every 1 month, 2 months. And when you do that, releases become a big deal and quite sort of anxiety inducing, because there's a lot of code, there's merge conflicts. The production is like way behind all of the development you've been doing over the months. And I just didn't want to be in that position anymore, because there's a lot of stress that comes along with that. And I'd been sort of reading about sort of feature flags around the time. I mean, back then it was quite a new sort of topic. But this, in theory, would let me roll out code quicker, so I didn't have to go through those stressful releases. So we started developing that internally. We started building a tool. We were always looking for new products to develop sort of as the agency, but we started developing it and we started using it with our projects. And we open sourced it pretty much like straight away. And we started getting a lot of people, like it wasn't even the main sort of focus at the time, but a lot of people asking about it. So 7 years later, and here we are. It's an absolutely crazy ride, but it's awesome nonetheless.
Wow, 7 years. That is dedication. I think that is amazing. I think a lot of people give up from their open source projects after like 7 days. And I think that's, highlights that it's really important that, we should scratch our own itch. We should try and solve something that's causing us a bit of a challenge, and also, persevere with that and get feedback and make it public from kind of the beginning, and therefore we can get that user feedback. I have shared, everyone, the repo in the chat, so do go check it out as well and drop a star on the project. And I see Krish says they've heard lots about Flagsmith recently, so you're going to hear more about it today, and I know Krish will probably implement it in all the EddieHub projects by the time the live stream is over. So that's really fast as always, and awesome to see Paduma here as well, and Nada as well too. Thank you so much. I know Praduma will like the Docker phase we have later on. That's the bonus one. So I've given away the bonus bonus section we'll have at the end. Also joining us today, we have Matt. Matt is the CTO at Flagsmith. So Matt, I'd love to know more about your role at Flagsmith and how you got involved as well.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. So yeah, as you mentioned, I'm the CTO here at Flagsmith, also one of the founders. So I was working at the same agency with Kyle. I was there about the same time. So for about 10 years ago, I joined around the same time as Kyle. So I was there from kind of the infancy of the Flagsmith project, really kind of getting a lot of the excitement out of kind of developing our own project coming from the agency, to move towards having our own kind of project and product to work on, was something that really excited me. So about 3 years ago, I moved from the agency across to work on Flagsmith full time as the CTO. And it's I've not really looked back since. So it's been really exciting. And obviously just love working with the open source community.
Awesome. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you were one of the founders as well. I looked at your, trying to find some of your profiles online, but it was really hard. So apologies for that. Thank you for clearing that up. So can you tell us more about some of the features that you have on Flagsmith and some of the use cases? I know we've all touched on it a little bit. And I'd love to hear more about it, and then maybe mention the kind of demos that we're going to do today. And I'm super excited to get coding and learn from you both.
Yeah, absolutely. So really the advantages and the features are really going to depend on sort of what you're developing, who you're developing with. But I like to summarize it into maybe like 4 areas. So yeah, these are the 4 areas of why you should be using feature flags, in particular Flagsmith. So first of all is velocity, better testing and bug handling, healthier code base, and then also targeted releases. So velocity, before feature flags, you have to be more careful about when you release code, because the code is coupled to the actual things that people can see. But with Flagsmith and feature flagging, you can essentially sort of split up the sort of areas of concern. So you can release code to production without users having to see what the code does, the features. With small teams, that's great because you can just keep releasing faster and faster. With bigger teams, it's also the sort of advantages of that are more than just that. With larger companies, you tend to be working within teams where you've got like product owners, where you've got QA and different departments, all with their own sort of position and sort of like they're different stakeholders to achieve the same thing. But with those large organizations, you can have your engineering team worry about the code and releasing the code, and then let your product owners, QA, worry about the actual features themselves, all sort of separately without blocking the sort of release of code. And then also, as we'll show with one of the examples later, the ability to remotely configure your functionality, that increases velocity by a lot, because if you don't have to deploy code all the time to make changes to your site, then you're in a much better position to be faster. Better testing, bug handling. So we're firm believers of testing in production. We believe that you get better results, better confidence if you can actually test in a production environment without affecting end users. This is because the code is real. It's production. All of the code's there. The data's there. So the amount of times in larger projects where there were like 10 different environments and I was testing on an environment, the thing worked fine. But as soon as you merge to production, everything breaks because of the differences. That gets reduced. And then healthier code base. I mean, this is especially true for sort of big open source, many pull requests sort of situation. Because of feature flags, you can worry less about releasing code because it's behind the safety net of a feature flag. And that means you don't have massive amounts of pull requests building up, merge conflicts, that sort of thing. And then, targeted releases, which we'll go over in an example today. So choosing sort of like groups of people or particular people that you want to release features to without affecting other users. So at high level, those are the reasons why I choose to use feature flags.
I love that. I can just, as you were talking, I was trying to think, where we could use those in all of our open source projects on EddieHub, and there are just so many places. And I think it's just great. I'm thinking, oh yeah, we do have that issue. Oh, and we do have that issue, and we do have that issue. So that is, really interesting to see all those kind of use cases, because I can relate to, I think, all of them. So that's great. So I'm going to remove my screen share, and I want to add your screen share if you're ready to go, because I'm super excited to dig right in. And I know others are as well. So if you're ready to go, I will pass control over to you, and I'll let you talk through our first coding example.
Yeah, brilliant. Live tech demo. I'm sure nothing will go wrong during this. We have a simple Next.js application with AppRouter, the latest version of Next.js. It's something I've been wanting to learn a lot more about. I've been using Next.js and Vercel for a long time, and this AppRouter sort of switch has a lot of sort of cognitive sort of differences. So it was really fun to sort of try out, and it will be fun to try out Flagsmith with this. So we've got a simple application here. It's very much like the simple create next application that you get out of box, but I decided to add a couple differences. Firstly, with this example, you can log in, and that will persist your sort of login. So that we can see some functionalities when you log in with an account, and how you can use Flagsmith to target rollouts. And then, other than that, it's a very simple code base. I think before implementing Flagsmith, I will go through in detail what the code base is from a code perspective, just so that people can follow along and actually see the real sort of stuff behind it. So we have very similarly to if you use create next app layouts. So people who haven't used AppRouter before, layouts is sort of like your main sort of app wrapper, I guess, though you can add layouts at different points in the hierarchy. So if you have subdirectories for routes, you can create layouts at each sort of step and have sort of several pages. You reuse that layout. So this, in this example, wraps our application. We have our nav at the top and our children, which is essentially our page underneath it. We have our page here. So this is our index page. So what we can see here, this is the code for that. And it's all very similar to what we'd see on the Create Next app. We have two links at the bottom, one that links to the Flagsmith docs, one that links to the Next.js docs. So then as well, how does the login work? So I wanted to play around with sort of how you can use sort of the latest Next.js for sort of combining server-side rendering, server-side states with the client side. So the way that logging in works is at the layout level. So this is at the sort of wrapper level. Layout doesn't re-render. So essentially, this comes from the server, and it never re-renders as you're changing pages. So it's not really sort of stateful, and you won't get any sort of set states in this and that sort of thing. All that this does is it takes from a cookie the logged in user, and then provides that to the application. Then page has a nav bar within it. Sorry, no, it doesn't. Layout has a nav bar within it where you can log in and log out. So this form here is what we're seeing here, where we have a couple inputs. Then when we submit, we log in. So if I click login, we can see that it's calling login. And then when I click logout, unsurprisingly, we're calling logout. And this is essentially using a hook that I created where we're hitting our own API and essentially doing the login request. And our API is pretty much a dummy API. All it's really doing is setting a cookie based on the user login, and just returning essentially the user JSON back to the application. So with this, we are essentially persisting sort of like a fake login based on the user's cookie, but it's not too dissimilar from how we would do normal authentication in a lot of examples.
It's great to hear how you've got this interest in the new Next.js app router server-side components, but you still have this kind of uncertainty of challenges, because I know I have a love-hate relationship with it, and I think, oh, this is great, and I think, why is this error just so generic, and I'm stuck, what have I done wrong, and so forth. So I'm glad it's not just me.
Yeah, I'm a massive fan of Next.js, and I always have been, though sort of, transitioning over to the app router, I've got to be honest, there's no way I'll migrate some of my old applications, at least not in the immediate future, because the difference is quite big, though it's super powerful. And it was really fun to sort of learn more about that. And I had to learn all about it because I provide sort of tooling for these sorts of technologies. So it was a necessary evil. I almost wish they didn't make such a big sort of new breaking change. It would make my life a lot easier, but there are really sort of like good sort of long-term plans that they have. And I think those guys are absolute geniuses at that company. They are really driving the way for front-end development.
Absolutely.
Right, so I've gone over the code base. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a Flagsmith organization that I'm going to use to create the feature flags with and implement this application with. So I'm at app.flagsmith.com. I've logged in, and I've got a bunch of organizations within my user, but what I'm going to do is create a new organization. So Flagsmith Next.js demo. So people can go to app.flagsmith.com and just log in and create an organization for free. And the usage is quite generous for people who just want to try it out and not pay for a subscription. So what I'm going to do is create a project, and we'll call this Flagsmith Next.js demo as well, because that's what we're building. So I've created my project, and a project is essentially a distinct sort of digital offering. So if you're creating an application for your users, and you've got a mobile application for your users that does the same thing, and if you've got like an API that's all servicing the same thing, I would create one Flagsmith project. And the reason being is because all of these different areas of the application can use feature flags, and in some cases the same feature flag. So a good example of this that I sort of like to bring up is sort of the race condition between releasing a new breaking feature on the API as well as the front end. And I had to deal with this a lot with my sort of classic big projects where, I mean, we had to spend hours discussing how the release was going to go before actually doing the release, because if you released your API first with this new breaking change, then your front end would break. If you release the front end first, then your API sort of integration would be broke. But if you've got a single project within Flagsmith, you can create the feature flag, release the code with it all off, and when it's sort of right, you can turn the feature flag on, and that could, in theory, turn the feature on for all of your platforms at once.
I love that because, sorry to interrupt, I love that because I know that exact same challenge. I had clients actually, some high street banks in London where they had microservices, and you're right, you can't guarantee that they'll finish deploying at the same time. And so in the end, ended up moving a lot of their microservices into a mono repo to try and like resolve that, but then it creates other problems and doesn't quite resolve it. So it is great that you can have that project with that feature flag, and then your microservices can all use the same tokens to get access to that Flagsmith project, and then can all kind of switch over at the same time. So I absolutely love that. Sorry to jump in, but I was just again, such a simple idea, yet it's so effective. So absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have any experience with microservices, but one thing I hear all the time is the orchestration of those is what becomes the nightmare. The sort of configuration and sort of like there's still the dependencies on each other, and like is everything sort of working, and visibility. So yeah, that's something that Flagsmith can definitely help with. One thing I do have quite a bit of experience with is developing web applications and mobile applications that share the same features. And getting the release parity between those becomes sort of quite difficult to manage, especially when you're dealing with the review process of all the app stores. And if you wanted to guarantee that the features are released at the same time, that would be very difficult. But feature flags definitely helps out with that. Right, so I've created my project within Flagsmith, and this is essentially going to drive the feature flags on my application. So when I've created the project, I essentially get a couple of environments created for me. The environments being the different deployments of your application. So if you have a dev environment, production environment, you could essentially have different API keys that link with Flagsmith so that you can turn your features on and off differently for each environment. And what I'm going to do is grab the API key from this project right here, this environment rather, and I'm going to keep a note of it here. So const Flagsmith environment equals that. And I guess this could go into like a .env file or something like that, wherever you sort of manage all of your environment variables, you can put it there. But from a sort of setup standpoint, we're done at this point from sort of creating an organization in Flagsmith, and we've got our project, and we will later on create our first feature flag. But what I'm going to do is go back to this project here. And I need to do a few things. First of all, since we're using Next.js, I thought it would be cool to have the feature flags be fetched and sort of that state be done by the server side. And then what we're going to do is pass that down to the client instance so that everything from there on, sort of past that point, it's all happening on the client. So to do that, first we need to fetch the feature flags for the project. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, initialize Flagsmith. So I'm going to create an instance of Flagsmith. My door is going. That's really
No
bad.
problem. If you need to get it, we could actually pause there. And if Matt wants to do the Docker demo, it might be a good time to add it now.
Okay, let's do that. Thank you very much for that.
No problem. So for those of you who are watching, we are getting into coding. And as I mentioned before, you can run this in the cloud for free on Flagsmith, but you could also run it locally on Docker for offline purposes because you want to host it in your own environment. So Matt is going to show us how quickly it is to get it up and running. So Matt, if you could share your screen and I will bring your screen up.
Yep. Just bear with me 1 second while I do that.
No problem at all. And here is the Flagsmith repo. For those of you who haven't had a look at it yet, don't forget to give it a start and give it a try out. And there are multiple ways. And we will, at the end, show you how you can also contribute to Flagsmith. They have some, awesome contributions. They got pull request templates, all that sort of stuff. So make it easier for you. Okay, now this is Matt's screen. So we will let Matt drive. Over to you, Matt.
Cool. Thanks, Eddie. Yeah. So as Eddie mentioned, I just want to show quite how easy it is to get Flagsmith up and running on your own machine using Docker and Docker Compose. So in the root of our repository, we actually have a Docker Compose file, which should have everything that you need to get started running Flagsmith on your own machine. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and clone the repository. So I'm just running out of my temporary directory on my machine at the moment. I'm just going to clone in the Flagsmith repository. wait for a minute while that does that. And then
this is a test of our internet connections, I think. And I notice this the most when I'm on the train tethered to 4G and the signal keeps dropping off. And I'm like, come on, just like 90%, and it cuts off. So that went really quick. So that was good.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a few more things to pull down. So now that I've done that, I should be able to, well, we can obviously just see in here that we've got the Docker Compose file. So if I do a Docker Compose up, that's going to pull down the latest Flagsmith Docker image, run alongside it the Postgres database that the Flagsmith application needs to run, and it should spin up everything that you need. So that will include the API, it will include the dashboard, it will also include the asynchronous task processor, which is something that I won't go into too much detail on, but it is quite important to the application and helps us do things asynchronously. So as you can see here, what it's done is pulled down the images. It's run some migration files. Now, because I have run this before, it's only had to run a small number of the migrations. If you're running this fresh, it will have to run a few more to initialize everything. But if we now head across, we should see, sorry, I already had this running, but you can see here, this is what it's given us. So I should be able to now, I can either register, so I can go ahead and create any kind of user here and get straight in. So this is just on my machine using that Docker Compose. I can go ahead and create a test organization. I can create my project.
So this looks very similar to, or exactly the same as to what Kyle did before on the cloud version. So in 2 or 3 commands, you've literally got the whole cloud version running locally, which I think just opens up so many opportunities. When I'm for me on a plane, I mean, this would be great because no internet. Maybe with some automated testing that we might be running a lot, running thousands of automated tests. We don't want to hammer the cloud. We could on GitHub Actions, when we run the automated tests, we could just add this to the Docker Compose and bring down Flagsmith. So yeah, I think that's really good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And if you want, so this is the kind of, as Eddie mentioned, this is the real quick start kind of hobby deployment, but we do have a number of other deployment options that you can investigate for more kind of production ready software. So we have Kubernetes support, and obviously our SaaS, and we can obviously also support other tools. So we have deployables for Heroku, for Fly, for other kind of one-click installers as well. So there's a bunch of different options if you want to go and host this yourself, basically.
I love that. I love it that you've got also like the Heroku versions and all the others. So that's just that's amazing. I think it's really, really good to hear that it's just super flexible and super easy to get started.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay,
so I can hand back over to Kyle now.
Let's do it.
Brilliant. Sorry about that, everyone. Of course, as soon as we do a stream, someone comes knocking at the door. Right, so I'm sharing my screen again. So yeah, the first thing we want to do is get our flags from the server and then pass them down to our application. So I'm going to create my Flagsmith instance, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to initialize the Flagsmith client, and I'm going to pass my environment ID, which, if I grab it from here, right. And it's erroring here, and that's because we need to make this function now async. And for people sort of like writing in Next.js and React, it does seem super weird that you're writing an async function in like render. That is like weirded me out. But layout is a bit of a special sort of component with the new Next.js. Sort of as I said before, it only renders once. and it can be async, and it can deal with the sort of fetching of data to sort of like populate your app with. So this pattern is absolutely fine in this example. So now that we've initialized Flagsmith with our environment ID, essentially what that's doing is it's fetching the feature flags from our environment. So any feature flags that we create, it will bring them back, and then we have access to them within the app. And what we can do with that is we can pass them down to our application as the sort of initial sort of state, the default state of our feature flags. So what we do here is we do server states equals flagsmith.getState. And actually, I just realized, so Flagsmith comes in a couple different flavors. So with Next.js, we're running a server-side capable sort of application. And for that, we created an isomorphic library. And the difference between that and the default one is that the default one initializes with sort of capabilities that are relevant to the browser. And the isomorphic sort of deals with the fact that you can be running in the server as well as the client. So examples being sort of like local storage, and sort of like the fetch API can be sort of slightly different in some instances. The isomorphic version deals with that and sort of lets you run in Next.js. So this essentially will be our server state. And if we stop here and just console.log the server state and we get our terminal, we can see here as we're refreshing, we can see the state here. So this is essentially what we'll be passing down to our client. Right, so we're successfully getting the flags from Flagsmith. Obviously, we don't have any flags yet, but I'll create one later. The next thing we want to do is sort of hydrate our application with those feature flags and let the rest of the application sort of query them and render things based on the feature flags. And for that, what we'll do is create a provider wrapper around our application. And this will be a client-side component that takes the server state, initializes the Flagsmith SDK on the client with our server state provided, so that it doesn't need to refetch the flags once we get to the client. So I'm going to create a component here and call it feature flag provider. And I'm going to create a simple component. So this is a simple function component. And what we're going to do is define what it accepts. So we want some server states. So Flagsmith comes with full TypeScript support. So all of this stuff has types built in. And we want our children. So what we're going to render underneath the wrapper. So that would be React node. And we have our server state as a property and our children as a property. So here what we want to do is Flagsmith has a provider. So we have React integration out of the box with a bunch of hooks and helpers to do with React. And the Flagsmith provider essentially is a sort of like context component that allows all of the components underneath it access the feature flags and Flagsmith itself with a bunch of hooks. So in order to render that out, we need a couple of things. We need the instance of Flagsmith, and we can optionally provide the server state, which in this case we have. So what that means is it will initialize the Flagsmith SDK under the hood and provide the server state as the defaults. So what I'm going to do now is get an instance of Flagsmith. So one of the gotchas with Next.js with AppRouter that I wasn't sort of used to is that simply having an instance of Flagsmith up here outside the component versus here can sometimes lead to really unpredictable results. And the reason for that is I think it's optimization sort of from Next.js, in that it will try and reuse sort of like in memory anything that's been sort of used as a previous session, especially if you're running like server-side rendered components. So that's one thing I had to sort of transition away from and sort of keep in mind when I was developing with AppRouter and the latest Next.js. So what I'm going to do is create an instance of Flagsmith here. There we go. So here, what I'm doing is I'm creating a instance of Flagsmith in a ref so that it doesn't get recreated every render. And I'm going to pass that down to my Flagsmith provider. And then what I'm going to do is render out the children. And I'm going to wrap that in a fragment so that TypeScript doesn't complain. And there we go. So that was essentially our initial setup. So, and well, finally, what we need to do is wrap our application with that feature flag provider and pass in the server state. And there is an error, and I know what that is. So another gotcha when moving to AppRouter and the latest version of Next.js is you have to sort of keep in mind whether your component is a client component or a server-side component. And to the error here is essentially saying that you can't use refs and you can't use sort of state and all of these client-side ideas in your component without sort of marking it as a client-side component. And to do that, as the error says, you just add use client at the top of the component. So this is an example of something that perhaps you should have been thinking about it before AppRouter, but you didn't really sort of necessarily have to without getting a sort of like error in your face. But now there is a really clear distinction between whether the components are client-side or server-side. So now that I've done that, we are in a position where we've hooked up Flagsmith. So then components can use and consume the feature flags within the application. And what I'm going to do is create a branch for this milestone. Step 1, hook up Flagsmith. So what I'm going to do at the end of this is create pull requests with all these different branches. So what we can see is a sort of step-by-step what we needed to do within our application to get to these points. Hook up Flagsmith.
I was kind of happy when you got that error for the whole server-side client-side component, because it happens to me all the time. And I think, oh, maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just me that I get this problem. So it's great to see other people have the same issue. So thank you so much for doing that.
No worries. Yeah, it definitely is annoying, but then it sort of trains you in a way. Now I've played with the latest Next.js a few times. I'm way more used to it. And it sort of helps me become a better developer, I guess, when dealing with sort of server-side rendering and that sort of thing. Yeah, this still happens to me all the time, though, for sure. Okay, so we're at a point where our application has Flagsmith hooked up. So what we want to do now is create a feature flag and actually implement the feature within the application. So my plan for this is to essentially get this message here, and instead of the current text, I'm going to turn this into a welcome message, and we'll be able to, at any point in time, turn on and off that welcome message via feature flags. So the first thing that I always tell people to do when developing with feature flags is to always create the feature flag before writing the code. And this becomes really important because if the feature flag is an afterthought with your sort of new feature, you're more likely to forget about touch points of that feature and you don't wrap it in a feature flag. So if we play out that example where you have a breaking new feature and you've only wrapped some of the code behind a feature flag and you release that to production, no matter whether the feature flag is on or off, you could be in a bit of an issue there because you've got code that is not protected by that feature flag. So creating the feature flag first, I always recommend that. So I'm going to go back to Flagsmith. I'm going to go to my environment and I'm going to create my first feature flag. And I'm going to call it welcome message. And here we get a bunch of options. So whether it's enabled by default within all of our environments, and then optionally, we can provide some more information to that feature, which is remote configuration. And I'll go on to this later. But first, I'm just going to create a simple feature flag, welcome message. So we've got that feature flag. And what I'm going to do now is turn it on for this environment. So what that's actually done is created the feature flag. And we can see in our production environment, it's off because we've created it with a default sort of value of off. But on our development environment, it's on. So based on that, what I'm going to do is go back to my application and show and hide this based on the feature flag. So let's get to finally coding. The code for this message is here, the markup rather. And what I'm going to do is componentize this so that we get a nice sort of self-enclosed sort of view of that feature on its own, rather than it being mixed with the whole page. And I'm going to call this components welcome message. So this is a simple component, doesn't take any properties. All it does is render out the welcome message, and I'm going to add it back to the page. And I realize I added the environment key here, but we don't need that now. So here we're going to render out, hopefully, the message by a feature flag. So feature flag message. And we're only going to render it out when the feature flag is enabled. So how do we do that? So Flagsmith comes with a bunch of hooks, and one of the most commonly used ones is use flags. So use flags lets you access the feature flags that have been provided by Flagsmith. So const welcome message equals use flags. And here we provide the flags that we're interested in. The reason why we do this is the application or the component here will only re-render if the flags specified have changed. And this is useful for if like you fetch the feature flags and a bunch of other ones have changed. We don't want to re-render this component because it doesn't care about those. It will only re-render when these flags change.
That's a great optimization there. We were just in the YouTube chat chatting with Matt and Dan about efficiency and optimizations, and so it's great to be aware of don't specify all of them and specify the ones that you want. Therefore, it is more efficient. Dan's question, which Matt answered, but I think it's an important one to briefly discuss now and hopefully get more time later, is are there issues with cold versus warm starts when deploying on Vercel serverless, i.e. do warm starts retain the flag values? I know with BioDrop we have had in the past some issues with various third-party services. I know Dan's done some awesome work to improve those, so he will ask the tough realistic questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So defensive programming and performance are obviously two really key factors to feature flagging, because feature flag solutions, just by their nature, have the ability to sort of block and determine whether your features show or not. So it's really important that A, the service is fast, and B, if in the unlikely event that it goes down, we have a sort fallback for that. So it really depends on your implementation, but all of our SDKs support caching, configurable caching, out of the box with sort of like TTL and that sort of thing for caching the flags. And in particular, if you're running on the server side, we have a local evaluation mode, which I think I'll leave to Matt to talk about. It has he's a lot more sort of experience on the server side than me, but it essentially lets you evaluate the feature flags locally rather than having to do API calls for every single sort of request you get for the feature flags. And then also there's feature flag defaults. So providing the application with a default set of flags to use no matter what, like if you can't access the Flagsmith API, these are the defaults that you're going to use. And you can set up sort of a pattern where you deploy your application when feature flags change. So we have webhooks out of the box for when feature flags are adjusted in the dashboard. You could, in theory, rebuild your application whenever that happens, write the feature flags to a file within your code base and consume that as the defaults within your application. And we built a CLI, and we have a guide on doing that even without the CLI. But you can do that as part of CI/CD.
I love that. It's so interesting. And something you said earlier as well about think about your feature flags before you start coding rather than build something and then try to wrap it afterwards. We have TDD, we have DDD. It's kind of almost like, would it be FDD, like feature flag driven development? But it kind of, makes sense. I think it's quite interesting that we need to think about it earlier on, and also some of those fallbacks if you want to. I love the default idea that if it is unavailable, it just returns the defaults. Therefore, it won't break, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tend to call it like feature flag first, but FDD, that's quite catchy. I'll have to remember that. It's quite a nice acronym. Okay, so carrying on sort of like with the demo. So here we've got access to our welcome message feature flag, the one that we created here. And based on that, we get a bunch of TypeScript autocomplete as well out of the box. So what we want to do here is only render this message out when the feature flag is enabled. So essentially, if welcome message.enabled, let's say if it's not enabled, return null. So, and we enabled the feature flag. So on refreshing that, we can see that the feature shows. But what I'm going to do now is disable the feature flag, refresh the page, and we can see that the feature is no longer there. So we can see that we're driving this feature via feature flags. And one thing to call out, that wasn't a real-time sort of thing. I had to refresh the page, as people might be aware, sort of seeing that with a keen eye. We can run Flagsmith in a mode where it is real-time, at least for our SaaS offering. But one thing I like to sort of suggest and point out to people, a lot of people think they need real-time feature flags, but in reality, a lot of the times they don't, and it may cause more problems to your application than is worthwhile. And I'll explain why. Let's say you're dealing with a bunch of feature flags throughout your application, and you've got a product owner who's enabling a bunch of feature flags at the same time. Do you really want your end users to all of a sudden see features popping in and out when you're enabling and disabling the flags? So that layout shift within your application. And the answer a lot of times is no. And it's better to be deliberate about when you're refetching the feature flags. And we've got a lot of documentation on when feature flags get fetched. But essentially, it's when you initialize the Flagsmith SDK, if you log in or log out as a user, because you could be getting different feature flags for those users. But like having it not real time by default was a deliberate choice by us. Right, so we've got our feature flag, and it's controlling whether or not we display this message. And that's great, but what we can do is something a bit better than that. Let's combine remote configuration with feature flags. So what I'm going to do instead of showing this message here is I'm actually going to configure what message gets displayed. And that becomes really useful sort of later on when you start dealing with targeted rollouts, which we'll also do as part of this demo. So instead of rendering out this text here, what we're going to do is render out welcome message.value. And at the moment, it doesn't have a value. But what we're going to do is go back to this feature flag and pay attention to this value column here. So features within Flagsmith are a combination of whether the feature flag is enabled as well as an optional value that comes along with that feature flag. So that value could be text, it could be JSON, it could be numeric, it could be any Boolean value if you wanted that, it could be anything. But in this case, what we want it to be is our welcome message. So here we'll write out welcome to the live stream, and we'll save that feature here. And what we'll notice is when we refresh the page, we see the message welcome to the live stream. So this is an example of being able to adjust UI that's within your code without having to write any code, without having to do any deployments, without having to commit anything to Git. So instead of writing any code or doing a deployment, we can literally edit this message here, click save, and users will start seeing a different sort of value for this. And then this is really useful for if the feature didn't work out. So like if this was crashing the entire application, we could just turn the feature off. And if we had sort of like, I don't know, an event where we wanted to display a different message, at any point in time, we can add this message and have it be available for our users. Right. So
I do love both of those examples. Sorry to interrupt, Carl. I'm just again thinking of BioDrop. I'm just thinking the messages. I think it's great. You know, you've got star our project or live streams coming up or whatever it is. I think that's great. The other thing that you mentioned is being able to turn certain things off. I think I made me think sometimes we get people load testing their BioDrop profile to inflate their stats. So they're trying to say, hey, I've got 100,000 views today. And it does, even on Vercel, and it scales, and on Atlas as well, it scales, but it still affects the performance of the other users. So one thing that I was thinking of as you were describing that was, if that happens, first thing we could do is maybe disable the collecting of the stats of everybody. Therefore, the platform still works as performant as it did before, rather than trying to increment all those stats and so forth. So that was kind of quite an interesting one there as well. I just thought of. That's
a really good idea. So in a lot of like the larger applications that I used to sort of develop on with SSG, we had heavy reliance sometimes on third-party data providers. And sometimes those providers could go down. So let's say if we were really reliant on a GitHub API for the uptime of this website, but only a particular feature of the website. But if GitHub was down, this was breaking the website. Rather than relying on those third parties, you could have those be behind a permanent feature flag and turn them off whenever you want. So those are really good examples. So sort of reliance on third parties, and like if someone's DDoSing your site and inflating their stats, then it's not going to affect other users in that example.
You're really reading my mind at the moment, so sorry to delay your demo, but another open source project that I'm thinking of doing is doing this whole like checklist of people's repos. So at the moment, if you go to insights and community, you can see like 8 points, but I've got like 31 points that I usually kind of check. I was thinking of doing that maybe as a SaaS product or something like that. But you got me thinking, you're right. If GitHub's API is down, I can just remove the kind of analyze button, as it were. They can see the historic results. They can see the result from yesterday, whatever it is, but they can't click, make a new run until, the API is back up and I toggle it back on. So it then looks like ours is no longer broken, if that makes sense. It's just temporarily unavailable. So I really like that. So I'm making notes as we go along. So thank you so much for that.
No, absolutely no problem. Yeah, because think of like what you would do in that situation. Like you'd have to scramble to fix it, like remove it, and then users are seeing your site and it's broken. Whereas with this, it's immediate, right? Like you can just click a button instead of writing code. And sometimes with some applications, I mean, deployments can be a nightmare. And if you've got bigger teams, you have to go through pull request sort of review and sort of like it's a whole thing. So it's sort of like about that rapid response to if things go wrong. It's like really a safety net, I think, for teams. Right. So regarding the demo, so this is really cool. So we've got a message being displayed based on remote configuration, and we can turn that feature on and off whenever we want. But what I'm going to do now is think about how we can show different messages to different users within this application, because as I sort of mentioned, we can log in, log out with an email address and password. What if we could display different messages to particular users who are using the application? So I'm going to do that now, but before I do, I'm going to create another branch and push to this. Step 2, implement feature flag. And this means at the end, we get to see the different sort of steps within GitHub repository of exactly the code that we had to write for each step. So feature flag to display welcome message. Right. So we want to essentially show and control the feature flags depending on the user that's logged in. So how do we do that? So Flagsmith allows you to initialize with an environment, but then optionally what you can initialize with is an identity as well as traits. So an identity is the user that you're wanting to get the feature flags for, so the context that you want to get the feature flags for. And that can be a user ID, but then also it can be a key value pair set of traits. And what you can do with those traits is essentially create rules to target feature flag rollouts with those traits. But I'll go on to that in a bit. Firstly, let's initialize the SDK with the user that we're logged in with. So we pass the identity, and we've got our default user here, default user dot ID. So this is the user ID that we're logging in with. So now with that code change, when I'm logged in, we can see within Flagsmith, as well as viewing the feature flags, you can also view the identities. And when you identify as a user using the Flagsmith SDK, what it does is it creates them within the admin panel. And from there, we can go through and view the feature flags for that individual user. So what I can do now is go to this individual user and adjust the remote configuration for this feature, but just for that particular user. So now I've done that. We can see that we have a reset button next to this feature for this user. So essentially, users would normally see this message, but if I'm logging in as this user, I see this overwritten message here. So now when I refresh the page, we can see, welcome to the live stream, Kyle. So this is great. Like, this is an example of adjusting a feature in production for an individual user and not affecting anyone else. So imagine a use case where you've rolled out the code behind a feature flag for a new feature that you're developing, and you want to test it in production before anyone else. You can go into your user and enable that feature without affecting any other user, and as well as enabling it, adjust the remote configuration of that feature without affecting any other user. And this is an example of that, where we're showing a different welcome message for my user.
I love that, because we do sometimes sometimes you want to test things that are maybe data sensitive, or you want to try it on a live environment, and you've done all the testing you can do in staging, etc. So what we've done in the past is like deploy it without the link in the, say, the nav bar, and then navigate in the URL. No one knows about it, and you're testing it that way. And then you have to then redeploy it. But GitHub Actions might take 10 minutes to run all the automated tests and all the rest. And so this is great because you can deploy it, enable it for a single person or a few people of the maintainers. And once you're happy, then enable it for everyone. So yeah, I think again, it's just so many ways that you've just simplified something we do like so often as well. So I think that's just awesome, and it's open source, which makes me super happy as well.
Yeah, and like a few years ago, I got super inspired by a colleague that we had that was pushing an idea of a mono environment, and that got me thinking just like so much about that idea. It was always seen as a bad thing to I don't know, I guess like test in production, push to production. It was like a nasty sort of idea. But feature flags with Flagsmith sort of they're part of a tool belt for this mono environment based idea. And really testing in production, I'm adamant that, well, depending on whether you can or can't, sometimes maybe you can't, but testing in production, if you can, is a lot better than testing in staging because it's real. It's as close to real as you can get. And you can be way more sure that enabling a feature in production with a feature flag and seeing it works, you can be way more comfortable with that than testing it on some staging environment and being sure that it's going to work in production. It cuts out that sort of bit of unknown, I think, testing in a production environment.
It's cheaper as well, right? Because you don't have to pay for the infrastructure twice.
Definitely. Like, I mean, some of these organizations that I was consulting for, they were getting like caught up in so many environments and paying for like AWS bills like through the roof just to maintain them, to have them sit there. And then what was always told to me by our colleague was use that money and invest in production instead, and invest in tooling in production, because production is the thing that the users are actually using. They don't care about some development environment. That's like an internal sort of focus. Like the thing, they care about the production environment being good. So you could take that money and invest it in production. Maybe it's beefier sort of servers, maybe whatever, to make your production environment better.
One recent issue we had at BioDrop a few months ago was doing custom domains on Vercel and putting our kind of middleware to manage that. And there's only so much you can do in staging because you actually want it to be in production and test it out. So again, that would be a really good one for feature flags that only enable it for a certain person and everyone else just gets ignored. So I definitely see a lot of it's solving a lot of problems that way, even for small projects like on Vercel and so forth. And yeah, like you were saying, I think Carly hit the nail on the head where you said like invest more in production for the entire experience, the user experience, but also the developer and experience as well. So if we can do that confidently, I know testing in production isn't great, but sometimes you have to, and if you can do it confidently, then I think that's fine.
Yeah, I think it's all about being sure that the thing works. And if you can use this to be a bit more sure, then you should use it. I mean, we've naturally started leaning on staging less and less throughout the years, I believe, at Flagsmith. And we do use production a lot more for our features, and we roll out features in production that we might not enable for a while, but it's there, the code's there when it's not sitting stale in a pull request, and at any point in time we can test it in production. Okay, cool. So we've got to the point where we are showing a message for an individual user. But if you notice, when I click log out and log back in, the message isn't adjusting. So let's fix that. And let me explain why that's happening as well. So we've adjusted the implementation so that Flagsmith initializes with our user ID. But this is all server side, right? And when you click log out and log in, this is a client side interaction. So what we need to do is actually identify with Flagsmith and log out of Flagsmith when that action happens. So if we go to our nav, what we can do is we can see the form submission code here is calling this login and log out function, which is part of this use user hook. So first of all, let's look at the login function. So essentially, when we come back from the API with our user, here's where we want to identify with Flagsmith. And when we log out, we can only identify, I guess, straight away with Flagsmith. So let's do that. So what I'm going to do is access Flagsmith within my client-side component. And I do that by doing getting the Flagsmith instance, const Flagsmith equals use Flagsmith, so one of our hooks. So here, what I want to do is identify with the newly logged in user. And we can do that by calling flagsmith.identify. And we want to pass the user ID and do that. And then when we log out, we just want to call flagsmith.logout. So what's that doing? So behind the hood, what that's doing is hitting an API, telling the Flagsmith API that we want to fetch flags for this particular user. And then when we log out, we're clearing that user and we're wanting to fetch the environment defaults. So now when we log in and log out, we can see actually the difference here. So here we're getting the value back from the environment, from my user. And when we log out, we're refetching and getting the remote config for the general environment. So this is how you identify and how you can target features for individual users. And I'm going to add this as a new branch and commit the code.
I see from the chat as well, Matt saying they've done a number of projects with mono environments and they use feature flags as well. So it seems like I'm a bit behind the curve. Everyone's using feature flags apart from me, and I think from later today, I'm going to definitely be using feature flags because I just again didn't realize how many pain points it solves, which I just think is awesome. I mean, we need more content on this, everyone. Like, need to shout it loud for the people at the back. So hopefully everyone listening and watching now or watching the replay can shout about it, and do tag us on socials if you do.
Yeah, a couple of things that comes from developers when we talk about feature flags a lot of the time. One, it's just an on-off. It's just a Boolean, right? Like, why do I care about just a Boolean? And then secondly, one thing that's super common, and we come up with this all the time with our customers, is you get a development team who say it's just a Boolean, and then they implement their own sort of like ad hoc version of a feature flag management system. So those two things are really common. But yeah, like as we're going through these examples, you can see how it's more than that. It's being able to target users and roll out different versions, and it's being able to make releases without deployments and testing in production, mono environment, all these sorts of things. It's a vital sort of part of, because I'd say, yeah, like with mono environment, I wouldn't see how you could confidently do a mono environment without feature flags, to be honest. I think you definitely need it, because if you're only deploying to production and there's no staging environment, you need something to sort of protect against those features and test those features without them hitting customers. Right, so I realized that the pace of this demo is a lot slower than what we thought, so I will crack on with the sort of next part. So we've rolled out a message that targets individual users, and we can determine the sort of feature flags based on individual users. And that's great, but like, let's say, well, your application could have tens of thousands of users, hundreds of thousands of users. We're not going to enable, disable features for like all of those users one by one, are we, if we want to roll out to like only a subset of users? And the answer is no, but it's still a really useful thing for development, testing in production as an individual developer. What we're going to do now is essentially group together users based on their information and roll out features to those groups of users instead. So how are we going to do that? So back to our layout, we're identifying as the user, but what you can actually do as well as that is specify a bunch of traits. So traits are essentially any information that you have about the user that you can see as being useful for grouping users together and rolling out features for them. It could be their location in the world, like if they're from a certain country. It could be their email address. It could be the amount of interaction that they're having with your product. It could be like literally anything that you see is useful for that sort of thing. You can add it as a trait, and you can start creating segments of users and rolling out features differently for those users. So what I'm going to do is exactly that. I'm going to send the traits along with my identity to Flagsmith. And what I'm going to do for best practice is I'm going to make that a utility function. So because we're identifying in multiple places, I want to reuse like what we're sending to Flagsmith. So I'm going to create a util function, get traits. And what I'm going to do is this would take a user, and we already have a user type that we defined here, which is essentially just ID and email. But then maybe they're not logged in, so maybe it could be undefined as well. We'll handle that case within this util function. So what do we want to do? So if the user is not logged in, so if there's no user, just return undefined. But if there is, what we do is return the email address, because we want to track that as a trait so that we can maybe target rollouts based on the user's email. Cool. So we've got that function set up, and now let's use it. So traits, get traits, and pass in the user. So great. So now that we've done that, if we refresh the page now, so it tracks that we're logged in, one thing that we'll notice now when we go to the Flagsmith dashboard is we can see the traits here within the dashboard. And as well, this is configurable. You don't have to store the traits and store the users if you're working in a data-sensitive organization. But if you do, then this becomes very useful for sort of seeing a one source of truth of the user and why they're seeing certain features be enabled and that sort of thing. And it becomes really useful if you're doing like percentage-based rollouts and rolling out to different groups of people in different ways. This is a nice one source of truth of like the what and why. Great, so we're doing that, and what I'm going to do is quickly in the login function, I'm going to pass the traits as well. So when you identify, you can pass in a user ID as well as the traits. So I'm going to call this get traits function again with the user. So now when we log in, log out, and when we refresh the page, we'll be sending the traits over. Cool. So that's great. We're tracking the email, but what do we do with that? So one idea I have in my mind is that what we can do is test the feature in production, but not just for my individual user, but for any user logging in with a Flagsmith email. And we do this all the time in Flagsmith. So the process is we roll our feature out behind a feature flag. It's off. The individual developer may test it for themselves, but then what would happen is we would roll it out to our internal team segment. And what that means is if you've got people testing your application, they can come in and test it as part of that segment. So how do we do that? We have to create a segment. So I'm going to create a segment for my project. And here, what we're doing is basically creating a bunch of rules that determine whether a user is in or out of a segment of users. It like groups them together. So what I'm going to call this is Flagsmith users, give it a description. So people logging in with a Flagsmith email. And I'm going to add a condition. So essentially, a segment is a bunch of rules, and you can do sort of like conditional based logic based on your traits. So we're targeting the email traits, and you can do things such as like greater than, less than for numeric traits, semantic versioning if you've got like versioned applications. So like example being, if you've got a feature, but it should only be available for applications newer than a certain version, you can sort of do that with segments, whether it's set, not set, basically the sort of things you'd expect. What I'm going to do here is match a regular expression. And I'm going to do .star at flagsmith.com. And essentially, that's my segment complete. So anyone with an email matching the regular expression .star at flagsmith.com, and that escapes the dot people who know regular expressions. So I'm going to create that segment. And now that I've done that, let's go back to my user, and we can see that the user now belongs to that segment. So we get that information when we're viewing the user. So now that we know that, let's roll out the feature for that segment of users. So I'm going to go to the features page. I'm going to go to this welcome message feature, and I'm going to add a segment override. I'm going to select the Flagsmith user segment, turn the feature on, and adjust the message so that it's obvious. Welcome Flagsmith. And I'm going to update that. And now when we refresh the page, we can see the message, welcome Flagsmith. So this is an example of where we've, based on a bunch of rules, rolled out a feature in a different way in comparison to the standard user that logs in. And when I log out, we can see that the message goes back to the default sort of value. And just to test that this is actually working, let's just type in just sort of like example email. And
I'm glad you're doing the non-Flagsmith email, because I know someone in the audience, especially like Krisha Praduma or Dan, would mention that. So that's an interesting one. And they were talking about how we would group things together on our stuff. So it's interesting that you've got the Semver, you've got the emails with the regex. There's various things you can do. So that's awesome. Like we'll probably do roles or something like that if they're a maintainer or something like that. So
yeah, roles, plans. I mean, all sorts of things happen. Like we have people in like the e-commerce industry that will roll out feature flags based on a user walking into a certain store, like within like anything that you can think of within your application. Yeah, the possibilities are quite endless, and you can create quite complex rules and groups of users as well. So you can really go fine grain. Right. So that covers targeting users and being able to roll out to individual segments of users. And I'm going to, again, create a new branch. Why can't I create a new branch? ID is playing up. Oh, there we go. Step 4, segment users. And I'm going to commit that. Okay, great. So what I'm going to do with this, I think there's maybe a link to this GitHub repository somewhere, but I'm going to probably after this stream create the different pull requests and show the different code differences. Though actually we could do it now since we're on the stream.
Awesome. While you're doing that, I think I've got the link. I will share it
Cool.
in the chat as well for those who want to follow along.
Great. So here we have the step 1. So the good thing about this is we get a nice sort of digestible sort of step-by-step code with here.
I know I'm going to refer back to this as well because I've made notes, but not notes on the code. So you were doing some interesting Next.js stuff for the app router, which I hadn't done before as well. So I was like, oh, that's quite interesting. I have to have a look and play with that. So I know this is going to help me as well.
Brilliant.
Yeah, 9% don't like open source. I think they're trolling me, to be honest, Matt. They do it. I ask that question quite often, and often, even one time I have seen it like 90%. Yeah, I'm doing an open source live stream, so I think they're just trolling me with a few people, so they don't like open source. I don't think we could find anyone in the world who doesn't use open source. And by that I don't mean like they're using npm install, but even my grandparents, they kind of, they got Android phone, they're using open source without even realizing. I mean, I think even some of the kitchen appliances have like curl in it, for example. Some people's cars have curl in it, so they're using open source one way or another, even if they don't realize it. So yeah, well, I'd love to know who those 9% were.
Yeah,
I think for us, like at least for me anyway, one of the things I get most excited about with Flagsmith, I mean, a lot of exciting things happen, but when someone creates like a really great pull request and it's just completely out of nowhere, and like they could be a client or just someone who's really interested in Flagsmith, to see that is just such a great feeling that they care enough about the idea to sort of help out and submit sort of fixes, improvements, that sort of thing. It's such a good sort of feeling, I guess.
Absolutely. I love it. I love seeing my notifications explode on GitHub, unfortunately, so I can't keep up with everything, and the maintainers do an amazing job, but I do miss out on a lot of stuff because I probably get like 2,000 GitHub notifications a day, so literally just can't keep up on it. But they do. There are some that you go, oh wow, that's awesome. I couldn't have done that, and I was just like, I didn't know about that. Thank you so much. And it's just awesome to see that. And sometimes it doesn't have to be big, right? I guess it implied that something big happened, but sometimes it could be a feature of something we're using that I just was aware that existed. Like I was looking through Flagsmith over the last couple of days, and I came across traits, but I didn't look into it. And now seeing that I can attach it to like a plan, like you said, or a role, I was like, right now it kind of, things have just started slotting into place because there's just so much going on in tech that it's great. And that's something I probably would have not implemented correctly, and then someone else would have probably in the community come and fixed it and improved my implementation, because they do that a lot, which I really appreciate.
Brilliant. Okay, so I think from sort of like a high level, we're quite good on a code perspective with this sort of demo. So I mean, like we say, like you can create as many sort of segments as you want to sort of target the users and sort of roll out different functionality. But yeah, from a sort of simple code perspective and getting started with feature flagging, I think that covers everything from Next.js and app router perspective.
That's awesome. I think you've shown that it's not loads and loads of lines of code, loads of complicated stuff. It's with a couple of clicks, a couple of commands, even if you want to do it locally and not in the cloud. But even easier just to do it straight in the cloud, and a few lines of kind of JavaScript or TypeScript, and you can get going, which I just think is awesome. And I saw you have so many integrations with so many other tools and stuff, which must be so hard to do, but it's great for all your users. So yeah, I think that was awesome. Now, like I said, I've made notes of where we could use it in EddieHub as well. And so what else would you like to show next? I know we had a whole list of things you want to do, and I know I'm excited. I also know Matt needs to go in about 5 minutes, but I can go as long as you need to, Kyle. So as long as you've got energy, I'm happy to keep going because I'm learning loads.
Absolutely, yeah. So I was thinking, so with your open source project, what if we hooked up Flagsmith to that and got an example running just like we've done here with that?
I would love that. That'd be great.
Cool. Let's do that. So I've actually cloned the repository in advance, and let's see if we go here. Sorry, have I?
So example number 2, we're going to just now, for anyone who's just recently joined, we're doing an example on a new Next.js, like fresh, clean install project using the app router, and which is great, server-side, client-side components, but also can be challenging as well. Now we're going to do an example of integrating Flagsmith into an existing project, not to a fresh, clean project. We're going to use BioDrop. It is using Next.js, but it is using the previous version of Next.js, which is more like get server-side props rather than the app router. So they call it the page router, I think. We're going to do that, and we're going to see how we can integrate it with BioDrop. So I'm super, super excited for this.
Cool. So let's get it running. I've ran MongoDB, and yeah, so we've got it running. Great. So, and yeah, we're using the sort of standard, and that's what I'm very familiar with, the sort of like old school Next.js setups. Yeah, we've got our app and our pages and that sort of thing. Great. So yeah, let's get started. So one thing that I'm thinking quite similarly to this original demo is within BioDrop, we've got these alerts here. And I think what we can do is something very similar and implement a sort of welcome message that's configurable with BioDrop. So let's look at how we can do that. So the first thing, so let's go to our index page. So yeah, we can see here that we're rendering out a bunch of alerts based on some data that we get, some props that we get. And an alert is a message, and it is can be a type as well. What we could do is, so remote config in our previous example was just sort of like a string, a message, but you can actually have remote config be anything. It can even be JSON. So we can configure this whole component with remote config. I think let's try that. So let's get started. So I'm going to create a new organization, or yeah, I'm going to create a new organization within Flagsmith. I'm going to call it BioDrop. And I'm going to create a new project, BioDrop website. And just as before, we get our different environments. And I guess what you could do in theory is use this for your production deployment and use this for your sort of like local development. But however you're set up, you would know how to sort of, formulate that. So let's get our API key. And then let's also install Flagsmith on the project. So simply npm I Flagsmith save. Great. Oh, I think maybe I already, oh no, there we go. Great, so now we've got that. Let's go to our app file. So just like you've got a theme provider, session provider, we're gonna provide feature flags with the application with our Flagsmith provider. And I think let's switch things up a bit here. So before with the app router, I was fetching the feature flags on the server side, rendered side with the layout. But here, let's go with a more sort of standard, and for anyone who's not using Next.js, but a single page React application, a client side focused approach as well. So we give it an instance of Flagsmith. And we want our isomorphic version. So you mentioned middleware as well with Next.js. So we've actually got a Edge compatible Next middleware module as well. And I think the syntax is exactly the same. It's just that Next middleware, if I'm not mistaken, limits the sort of web APIs that you can use, and you have to be quite low level in like what you're sort of doing, but we've written something that handles that anyway. So if you wanted to add feature flags to your middleware, you could do it as well.
Nice.
Sorry guys, I'm just going to jump in there. I'm going to have to drop off, but I'll keep following the chat, and if there's any questions that I think I can answer, then hopefully I can jump in and answer those. So yeah, thanks everyone, and hopefully see you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks for joining, Matt. I really appreciate it.
All right. Cheers.
Right. Cheers.
But don't worry, everyone. We're going to continue going. Of course, we've got more coding and geeking out to do. So thank you, Kyle, for steaming ahead and, powering through. I really appreciate it.
No worries. I enjoy doing this sort of thing. Right. So we've got our Flagsmith provider, and we've wrapped our application with it. It looks very similar to how you'd wrap an application with other providers as well. And if we refresh now, I believe what we'll start seeing is a request. Yeah, so we see that we're fetching the feature flags for Flagsmith. Obviously, we've got none yet, but we can see that we're hitting the API and we're getting the flags. So we've wrapped our application really quickly. That was very sort of simple to do. So next, I'm going to create my feature flag. And I'm going to call this, we'll call it welcome message again. And it's going to be disabled by default. And I think let's give it a default value. Since we're using JSON in this example, let's get a default value up. So let's take a look at our alert component again. So our alert component takes a type and a message. So let's put type and message in the JSON. So type, and let's default it to info. And let's have message. Hello string. Great. So now we've created that. And one thing you'll notice is we've added a bunch of like validators within Flagsmith, because obviously you're creating remote configuration and you could be typing things out sort of like wrong here. So we've added validators in for the different sort of languages. So people can use remote config for XML, TOML, YAML, that sort of thing as well. So yeah, built-in validation and syntax highlighting for that sort of thing. Great.
That's super useful. It's so good. It frustrates me when places don't have that and you have to write JSON. You think, I have to write JSON. Please validate it. Please syntax highlighting it just makes it so much easier, that whole developer experience.
Yeah, I think it was originally like quite a selfish sort of like approach from me, in that I use this all the time and it would drive me mad if we didn't have this. I think I implemented that purely based on that. So let's enable that feature and let's add it to our page. We've got everything we need from a Flagsmith point of view. Let's add that feature to the page. And I'm going to create a component for this, and I'm going to call it feature flag alert. And we're in JavaScript land here, so I'm going to write it in JavaScript. So feature flag alert takes no properties, and what we're going to do is get our welcome message, use flags. Great. And what we're going to do, if the welcome message isn't enabled, we're not going to return anything. Otherwise, we're going to get the JSON value of the welcome message and render out an alert. Now, Flagsmith has the ability to like sort of render out the value, but I think we can do something a little bit neater in this example. What we can do is we can get Flagsmith, and what we can do is do flagsmith.get value welcome message, and I believe we can specify JSON as true for that. So what that will do is tell the Flagsmith SDK that we're actually getting JSON to try and parse it. Otherwise, we'd have to write some code to like do a standard sort of like try catch, and sort of like if it wasn't valid JSON and that sort of thing. So this is a nice little one-liner to sort of do that behind the hood. And then also what we can do, because we could deal with the idea that maybe there isn't a value, or maybe it's invalid JSON, we could specify a fallback here as well. So
that's super useful. Nice.
We could do that. But then as well, as I say, this wouldn't be used for supplying default flags necessarily. You can do that when you initialize Flagsmith, but in the component itself, if it failed to parse the JSON, that's like a nice sort of convenient thing to have. So const welcome message, and since we're doing that, we don't actually need this stuff, but we still do want to use flags, because as I said, this controls when the component re-renders. So when this changes, this component will re-render. Actually, no, we do want that because we're checking whether it's enabled. So let's call this welcome message JSON. So what we want to do here is render out an alert, and we want to have the message. So message, and we want to do the type, welcome JSON dot type. I guess we could use a spread operator to do that as well, but I'm not going to do that. Right. And now let's render out this welcome message and feature flag message. And if all things went right, we see the message hello stream. First time I expected to have made a mistake there. Weird. Okay. So
it's weird when it works first time. Absolutely. You're expecting that error and you think, oh, I'll just fix the error real quick. And you don't get an error. And you think, it's too good to be true.
Yeah. But cool. That worked first time. And now, yeah, within a sort of couple of minutes, obviously I spent a while talking, but we've got feature flags hooked up to BioDrop. And sort of expanding on the previous demo earlier, if a user logged in, you could start identifying them, you could start controlling this feature as well as other features with sort of segments and start sort of controlling that functionality within BioDrop. So yeah,
absolutely. I think, one example straight away, even before getting into kind of the user part, which I think is great, is the line right at the top, star our repo. I think we could, do some A/B testing on that as well. We could do, like you said, when you log in, we could display a different message about, if they're a beta user, maybe we could say, hey, there's this new beta feature that you can use. Obviously, not everyone's going to see that message because they're not a beta user. There are just so many things, and I have been like trying to organize it in my mind on what we could use it for, maybe for the repo rater project as well, because that is a newer project that we've been looking at. And again, like I said, there's also the kind of health check, open source health check repo thing that I'm going to start working on shortly as well. So yeah, I'm trying to think of there's so many places it could be used because it is so flexible. It's like a building block, and you can use it for so many different things. With what you said, the Boolean, but also the message, the trait, or and also even the JSON as well.
Yeah. So thinking about beta features, so yeah, like what you could do is you could let people opt into beta, and what that would do is set a trait beta true. And then what you would do is create a segment that matches the beta trait to be true, and then you control all of your features and enable it for the beta segment.
Oh, yes. I like that. So it's not, so we could have an alpha and beta. I'm thinking alpha is we choose it ourselves. These are the maintainers and so forth. But then you're right. You can have an opt-in beta, and people could opt in if they want those features or not. I absolutely love that. That is great.
Yeah.
You've definitely thought about features a lot, I think.
Yeah. Sometimes in my sleep. Yeah.
Feature flags. Sorry, not features. Feature flags.
Yeah. I use them a lot. Like I'm in a bit of a unique situation where I help organizations use the thing that I help build. So rather than like simply sitting here selling it, I'm a customer, user, sort of all at the same time as well with it. So I have a lot of different things sort of going around in my mind around feature flagging all the time. So, yeah.
No, but that's interesting. I think that you've got that kind of that 360 view, which I think is great. It's really, really interesting to see that.
Cool. So now I could do a pull request, and then you could get started with Flagsmith in BioDrop. So that's how we've done that.
That's awesome.
Cool.
And you did it so quickly as well, and I love that. Cool. I know when I started using it, it didn't go well for me, and it wasn't because of Flagsmith. It was because I was struggling with the server-side and client-side components. I think I was being lazy and not moving stuff into subcomponents. So I was trying to do stuff async, but then I started doing interaction. So I need to put client at the top, and then it started breaking, and then it was all my fault. I was just trying to cut shortcuts, and really I should have put it into components, and I think I wouldn't have had that issue, basically.
I think that cuts out a lot of noise sometimes, and it definitely helps. Like I think it helps them with the demo to sort of do things without making mistakes for sure. But yeah, I mean, because there's so much noise on a page, right? Like,
Yes.
you could easily sort of misread and like read one line up, down. It lets you concentrate, I guess, and sort of do it in isolation. It's cleaner as well, because then you could reuse this on like different pages and stuff like that. So,
exactly. And even different projects, you know, I do a lot of the time copy components between projects. So I should remember that putting it into components not only makes it reusable on that one project, but also on other projects as well. And I loved how you demoed that it so quickly as well on our project, not just on a clean Next.js project, on a new Next.js project, on an existing project.
Yeah, I think one thing I sort of have a gripe with is when SaaS products or development tooling, what have you, sort of show a really idealistic hello world app on their homepage. I just think that's so dishonest and not dishonest, but it's like really idealistic. And when it comes to a real project, you've got your own sort of tech debt, sort of complications and that sort of thing. I mean, one thing I like to demo, and I can show this now, we've been developing Flagsmith for like years, and since the get-go, we've been using feature flags from Flagsmith to drive our features.
That's awesome.
And what I can do is literally show you a living and breathing production example of us doing that. So here we've obviously got the BioDrop website organization that we just created. But what I can do is go to Flagsmith organization, and you can see things end up looking quite a bit different. And actually what I can do, we can go to demo.flagsmith.com. So this is a perfect sort of code replica of production, but it lets us toggle feature flags without affecting end users. So everything's exactly the same. We can go to this Flagsmith organization. You can see we've got a bunch of projects here. But this one in particular powers this admin dashboard that you're seeing right now.
Right.
So we can go to this and we can literally see all of the feature flags that we're using at the moment. And on the left, you can see the environments that we've got. So we've got demo, production. I mean, we rarely use staging anymore. Like I say, we really do use sort of mono-env like quite a lot. But we've got this demo environment, and this powers the features that you can see on demo.flagsmith.com. And this is where in bigger projects comes more complexity, more sort of like things that you have to deal with. Tagging feature flags is really important when you start using feature flagging heavily. We use tagging to sort of tag the release state of the features. And then also if a feature is permanent. So normally when you have a feature flag and you've deemed the feature to be stable, what's best practice is to remove that eventually from your code base, because you don't want a code base sitting around for years with hundreds and hundreds of ifs essentially in them and all of these feature flags in them. You do want to keep a hold and maintain a sane amount of feature flags. That being said, some feature flags could be permanent. So we've got a bunch of permanent feature flags here, and one is very similar to the demo that we just did. We've got an announcement feature that's a permanent feature flag. We never want to remove that from our code base. You can see here that that's what it did. And our example for our demos is real time versus having to refresh the page. We can see here we've got an announcement based on the JSON that we supply here. And it lets us sort of schedule and set announcements. Because as well, actually, what you can do is rather than just turning a feature on and setting the values, you can actually schedule it as well. So I think relates to something you were saying earlier. You could set a date and time for when that goes live.
Yeah, which I think is great if you have like any campaigns like on Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube videos scheduled to go out. You can then kind of schedule that to go out at the same time, which I think is awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, we use that sometimes, and then also trying out features by rolling it out to a certain percentage of users. So one thing that we could do sort of like here is you can add a variation and roll that out to like 50% of the users and like adjust the remote config value sort of that. So you can create sort of like these ABN sort of splits as well. And you were sort of mentioning analytics. So we don't like to mess with analytics and implement analytics ourselves. There are a bunch of tools that do that really well. you can enable some like out of the box integrations with like Datadog, like Dynatrace, and like different sort of like analytics platforms like Segment and that sort of thing. So what that does is it sends your feature flag evaluations to your analytics providers. And let's say you're rolling out a new feature to 50% of people and they're checking out more. We pass that feature flag evaluation to your analytics providers so that you can sort of say, okay, people with this feature flag, with this value, convert more. And yeah, they've got a better sort of success.
It's good that you've got those integrations as well. I think that's great.
We from the get-go, because you mentioned sort of the idea that it's harder to sort of like deal with all those integrations. I think creating an analytics tool is really hard. We don't want to do that. We want to concentrate on feature flags. We don't want to also confuse what we're focusing on. We do this, and like other people like do analytics. So pass the data to them, let them.
Makes sense. No, absolutely, it makes sense. Have it focused. I think, some products just, like, I don't know, I don't want to badmouth anyone, but there's a product that I used to use years ago and I absolutely loved it. It did what it said in the tin, did it well. And then I didn't use it for a few years and I came back to it and I was like, what's happened? It's like morphed into this absolute monster. It does everything, like from the kitchen sink to washing my car and everything. I was just like, I just wanted to do that one thing. And obviously the price is inflated massively with it as well. And so didn't use it. They kind of lost a customer. And I was such a big advocate of the tool before.
From being sort of like a bit in the industry now, in the SaaS sort of like tooling industry, I could hazard a guess as to what happened. I would imagine that they potentially got a bunch of funding from VCs and they had a lot of pressure to roll out new features, new value, and charge a load more to get a load more money to satisfy the fact that they borrowed a load of money from venture capitalists.
That's so interesting that you got that. I didn't even say who it was because it's exactly what happened. I was like, what happened? They got a massive chunk of investment. Yeah.
We see it quite a bit. We have, I remember when we were initially talking about this, we were really adamant that we just don't want to take any funding. We're fully bootstrapped.
Awesome.
We were really fortunate to get profitable and we just want to keep that way and keep a sort of sane, like healthy business by not raising a bunch of money and having a load of debt. And it lets us concentrate on what we see as valuable rather than having external pressures. I'm super proud of that as well, that we were able to do that because, I think it does compromise the integrity of what you're trying to build. And I built, like with the team, obviously, but I built this sort of like our initial use case, really. I didn't build it for like some other pressure telling us what to do. Yeah.
Which I think is awesome. Like you stay focused, you don't have any kind of KPIs that just don't make sense to the original kind of focus of the project. And so, I mean, that's why I'm thinking my next SaaS product, which I'm researching and playing at the moment, I'm thinking it's going to be more of a micro SaaS. I want to be super focused because I felt with BioDrop, we didn't take any investment or anything like that, but we just kept on adding more and more features. I was full-time on it all last year and it kind of ended up trying to do too much. Not that it's got too many features. I don't want to say, hey, we've built loads of awesome stuff, but it was just a bit like all over the place because I was like testing the water. I was like, maybe people might want this. Let me do a kind of MVP of that sets of features. And if they like it, I'll add to it. If not, I'll do over here. But I ended up doing too many things. And I think people realized that it kind of lost its focus a bit, let's say. So
it's addictive. I imagine if you enjoy it, it's your product, you sort of like, you just dream up features and then the next day you go and implement them. It's really, you've got to stay, I guess, a bit disciplined, I suppose. One thing that definitely helped us, we were spending a while thinking about like what SaaS products to build within Solid State Group, the agency. Okay. And one thing that we identified is to build something that you can be their first user and you actually use it rather than dreaming up something that you're not in the industry. Like for us, that was like build dev tooling. We're developers. We can use the thing that we build and we're not dreaming up sort of like features. I'm not saying that you are, but like for other people sort of like coming up with SaaS ideas, doing something that you've got a clear idea of what's useful and what's not, because you would use it yourself, that's like really advantageous if you can do that.
Yeah, you're right. That's absolutely interesting. If you used your own product, then you're kind of living and breathing it rather than just trying to do something to solve something that you're not familiar with. So it's so true, and it's great that you did that. And yeah, hopefully we're going to do the same. We've got a few ideas, and we were going to start one, but because of that exact reason, we bumped it. And we're like, look, we're not experts in the area. We think it's a problem, but we're not expert in the area. So I can talk about it publicly if you're happy to. It's basically, I get so many people DMing me, so many great people DMing me saying, hey, I'm looking for a role in this area. And I get so many companies, like open source remote companies, looking for good people. And I try and join them up manually when I can and so forth, but it doesn't work. So one idea I had over Christmas, when I just got an influx on both sides and I just couldn't, marry them up manually. It's like, right, can I make some sort of job board that was focused on open source and remote work and had some extra features? But again, I don't know much about that. So I was struggling to be different to another job board rather than just having a bit more focused on open source and remote. And so I thought about it for like a month and I just couldn't solve it. I wanted to solve it, but I just couldn't solve it. And then whenever I asked people, everyone just kept on saying AI. And I was like, well, that's not really concrete enough for me to do it. So we do for our clients like open source reviews in terms of how's the onboarding process, how can they get more contributors and stars and so forth. And it's quite time consuming. Yes, we have a template, but it's quite time consuming. So a couple of weeks ago, when a client said, look, can you do ours? Like, yep, sure. It takes about a week turnaround time. And I said, well, I need it tomorrow. And I was like, okay, well, it's possible, but it's going to be a long night. And then that's what I thought. I could probably automate 60% of that. Therefore, I could scale it and sell it, and it's a lot cheaper. And if people want to use that, only that, then great. And if they want that more bespoke one, they can pay extra and I can do it. But I've kind of got something that I'm super familiar with as well. So, and I could use it myself, right? It could be my baseline of getting started. And then, if someone just bought the bespoke and didn't buy the automated one, I can use the automated one myself. It gives me my 60%, and then I could do the kind of remaining 40%. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking about doing and possibly starting next week.
Awesome. Yeah,
but
sounds fine.
Awesome, thank you. It will be micro SaaS, like super focused. But yeah, we were chatting with Sarah yesterday about what would you charge? It's just about so hard. And that's harder than the technical side. Like to build it, I think you can just kind of get your head down and build it. But
yeah, that is a very difficult thing. Like, so when we started it purely from a technical, so we ended up getting a couple other people on board that were super knowledgeable about that, but concentrate on what you know and maybe ask sort of people who are specialized. Pricing is very difficult, and it's something we've improved and learned a lot about along the way. Sure, but I mean, from my perspective, I concentrate purely on the product and all the geeky stuff, and yeah.
I can relate to that. That's the stuff I want to do. Yeah. So it makes sense. But I love the real world demo example and having stuff that are permanent. You're right. Those announcements would be permanent, and other stuff might be temporary. Hey, Carl even, sorry. Hey, Carl, how you doing? Carl is the maintainers on the EddieHub projects as well. And wrote the API project and the Good First Issue Finder project and so many other projects as well. And they have a question. I'm just trying to see it. YouTube is covering up part of the message with a heart, so I can't really see it. I think it says, is the product in the dev tooling space? Oh, yes. Yes, it is. So I would say have a look. We've done a few examples on the live stream. We have done Next.js. Carl is more into Svelte now. Carl got me into React and Next, and then as soon as I got into it, jumped to Svelte kit and so forth.
I see. Say no more. This is a very common, the latest and greatest front-end framework. I mean, things have calmed down a bit, but it used to be wild. It used to be a new framework coming out every day. But Svelte is pretty solid. A lot of really good developers really rate Svelte. But I'm not surprised. That sort of lineation, I've heard it a lot before.
I'm a bit slow, so I'll probably look at Svelte in about 10 years when the next thing has come up. I don't like to jump around too much. I'm not as smart as Carl. So Yes, but yeah, we were doing Next.js like new project, adding Flagsmith to it, and then we've also added an example to BioDrop as well, so we can see how it ties into an existing project and a project that everyone's familiar with. So I think Carl is a maintainer on BioDrop as well. I think we was maybe on a live stream with me at the beginning, setting it all up. My memory is the worst, but Carl definitely helps me out a lot as well. So appreciate you being here. Let me see what in the chat I can see. Oh, the new idea. Sorry, is the new idea in the dev tooling space. I wasn't looking at it into that space like Kyle was mentioning. I was thinking more for, I suppose, management looking to try and get more stars and contributors to their open source projects. But you could look at it from a dev tooling space, I suppose. Carl's doing next at work. Yes. But your open source projects all around Svelte. So yeah. But I think it's just so interesting. So what's your roadmap looking like, Kyle? With
so we've actually got a public, because we're open source, we've got a public roadmap on GitHub, so everyone can see and everyone can make suggestions. It's one of the great things about sort of open source. One of the upcoming things that I've helped develop recently is versioning of the features. So we've got like an audit log at the moment that shows you whenever you change any feature flags that you roll out. But what we're developing now is for every single change that you make, you get your own version and you can click roll back and compare the sort of like remote configuration values. So that's going to be really exciting. But yeah, we've got a public roadmap. It turns into, now we've been sort of established for so many years, a lot of sort of like enterprise features that we've never even thought of before, like a big organization having this requirement on this stack and sort of like big management of teams and stuff like that. But no, all of our roadmaps on GitHub, so you can check it out. And we have a lot of contributors, so if there are any eager coders out there, like with like ideas and bug fixes, they can help be part of the journey.
I love that. That's awesome. So yeah, everyone should take a look. Let me share the repo again in the chat as well, and then people can go check it out. Anything else you would like to show or demo?
From a demo perspective, I don't think so. I mean, I think if anyone wants to get involved, you can clone the repository for free, you can set it all up for free, you can sign up for free, you can join our Discord where we've got a bunch of conversations going on, questions answering. Glad to be here, glad to show you all about Flagsmith, and hopefully you've enjoyed it.
I've had a great time. So thank you so much for spending 2 hours geeking out with us, teaching us about Next.js and Flagsmith and so forth. And I love your open source project. I think that's amazing. So I really appreciate it. I've just shared the GitHub link in the chat. Everyone go give it a star and go try it out and let us know how you get on. And we'll be adding it to the EddieHub project. So if you want to geek out with me, stay tuned. We'll see you in our Discord. And if you have any Flagsmith questions, go and ask in the Flagsmith. Did you say Discord as well?
Discord or GitHub, depending on the issue. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, it's a good place to end the stream exactly on the 2-hour mark. Kyle, if you can stay on for a minute afterwards, I'll just say thank you personally. And everyone else, have a great rest of the week, and definitely keep contributing to open source and get involved. Thank you all for joining. Bye, everyone.
See you, everyone.